The hunt for medicine that can cure dreaded diseases such as syphilis, gonorrhea and pneumonia has been going on since the beginning of civilization. But it was not until the end of the 19th century that the discovery of how infectious diseases are spread came about. At the beginning of the 20th century, German doctor Paul Ehrlich developed a substance similar to arsenic with which to treat patients with syphilis. However, this proved to be toxic and had strong side effects. Then, in 1928, Scottish doctor Alexander Fleming accidentally stumbled upon a completely new medicine. One day, whilst working with bacterial cultures, Fleming discovered a spot of mould. It wasn't unusual for Petri dishes to be polluted by fungus, but the odd thing was that the bacteria around the mould had disappeared. Fleming found this fungus, known as penicillin, could prevent the growth of dangerous bacteria such as staphylococci and anthrax. Experiments on rabbits showed that penicillin was apparently harmless, but Fleming didn't succeed in proving that the substance had a curative effect on people. This happened over 13 years later, and penicillin was then mass-produced in the United States.
Through mass production methods, America is continually increasing its output of penicillin, the new drug that effects almost miraculous cures. The liquid medium in these bottles will grow the mold that forms penicillin. All penicillin produced is used by the Allied fighting forces. The liquid now charged with penicillin is poured from the bottles. Turned into a powder, it is ready for use.
Allied casualties in Normandy received the most expert medical care science can provide. Two modern treatments, penicillin and blood transfusion, have cheated death in thousands of cases. Gangrene, from which millions have perished in past wars, has been conquered by the miracle of penicillin. Thousands of men, thanks to penicillin, will come home to their thankful families. The whole world of peace to come will reap the benefits of this great wartime medical discovery. Science has won another victory over death.
Profoundly impressed by penicillin's dramatic power, Fleming addressed himself to the British government about the need for large-scale production. And the press took up the cause. The mold was grown in thousands of flasks. Britain's output joined the huge supplies now coming from the United States to give life to hundreds of thousands of soldiers. By the end of the war, flasks had been replaced by great steel vats, each making 15,000 gallons of penicillin liquid. And huge factories were in production both in Britain and the United States. Penicillin was now for the world.
In the post-war era, a long line of new antibiotics that could cure many major diseases was developed. Streptomycin, for example, cures tuberculosis, and tetracycline is used to treat pneumonia. In just under 30 years, the mortality rate of young patients suffering from pneumonia fell tenfold.
In fact, you could get penicillin in face creams. You could get it in cosmetics.
In the late 1940s, a new property of antibiotics was discovered which had great influence on the production of pigs, chickens and other livestock.
Among the many valuable new products created in agricultural laboratories are mass-produced antibiotics.
In the 1950s, the sales of antibiotics became big business, and thousands of tons were used to combat disease. And in livestock, it was used as a growth promoter.
It was at a time when agriculture was really changing and really becoming much more of a, at that time, it was not a pejorative, but it was an industrial model. So farms were getting bigger. Animals were getting put closer together. When you put the animals closer together and have them confined, then it's a lot easier to pass diseases back and forth. Giving them a little bit of antibiotic sort of seemed to fix that problem and sort of put a Band-Aid over it anyway.
But there was another benefit, one they had not anticipated.
The power to promote growth. Note the weight of a chicken raised for 8 weeks on a regular feed. Now another chicken nourished for the same period on regular feed plus terramycin, a 15% increase in growth.
Once something special for Sunday dinner, chicken, inspected and graded, is now thrifty every day.
People don't realize how expensive chicken used to be.
The miracle drug, however, began to have its drawbacks. Pathogenic bacteria could apparently become resistant to penicillin. Back in 1945, in the New York Times, Alexander Fleming warned against the uncontrolled use of penicillin and also pointed out that taking too small a dose made a good breeding ground, as bacteria could survive small doses. No one took notice of Fleming's warning, and it wasn't until the 1960s that people realized the miracle drug could fail.
Late in 1967, there was a small outbreak of an E. coli in the children's wards in a hospital in northeast of England in Middlesbrough. 11 children died. Almost all of them very weak. They had been born prematurely. And as far as the medical profession was concerned, this was not either unusual or terrifying. It was disturbing because the E. coli which killed these children was resistant to antibiotics. And the press in 1967 realized the public did not know that children were dying in British hospitals of E. coli. This became a terrible scandal, and E.S. Anderson, a very active scientist within the public health laboratory, warned that it was conceivable, he couldn't prove it, but it was possible that the resistance which E. coli had acquired had been developed in animals. So that here was an example, possibly a warning of a much worse epidemic to come.
Due to public concern, the British Parliament set up a committee to investigate whether the use of antibiotics in livestock could increase the growth of resistant pathogenic bacteria.
The British government sounded an alarm in a study called the Swan Report.
This was a milestone report. They said that antibiotics shouldn't be used to get the animals to grow faster because one of the unintended consequences was antibiotic resistance. Yes, it was economically short-term good, but in the long term, antibiotic resistance was a real problem.
The Swan Committee's recommendations brought about a ban, first in England and later in other European countries. In husbandry, 4 different types of antibiotics were banned, as they're vital in combating human diseases. But the use of other types of antibiotics as growth promoters in livestock continued to rise. In the early 1970s, more and more resistant bacteria types were found. The aggressive Staphylococcus had long since survived penicillin, but up until then, new types of antibiotics had managed to suppress this most dangerous bacteria. But there were grounds for concern, for in the 1970s, diseases which previously had been partly suppressed returned. The number of cases of tuberculosis began to rise, and gonorrhea could no longer be cured by many types of antibiotics. Many pathogenic bacteria began to show signs of multi-resistance. One of the most dreaded bacteria, the golden Staphylococcus aureus, had also become multi-resistant. For several years, Staphylococcus aureus was resistant to penicillin, but now the bacteria could not be suppressed by penicillin's successor, methicillin. MRSA or the superbug as it's also called, is dreaded in every hospital because it can spread infection during operations and thereby disrupt patient treatment. MRSA bacteria quickly spread round the world, much to the concern of health authorities, as there was now a diminishing number of new types of antibiotics which could substitute previous ones. The drug industry had practically given up on finding new types of antibiotics. The dreaded multi-resistant MRSA could still be wiped out by one antibiotic, vancomycin, which is one of medical science's last big guns to be fired at advancing bacteria. Vancomycin, however, also had drawbacks when treating another bacteria strain, namely the less aggressive Enterococcus bacteria vancomycin-resistant enterococci, or VRE. In just a few years, VRE bacteria were widespread. A study of American hospitals in 1989 showed that under 0.5% of bacteria were resistant, a figure which would rise 4 years later to an astounding 10%. The spread of VRE caused much concern, even more so when Danish studies showed that VRE bacteria developed during pig and chicken production by a growth promoter that's related to vancomycin. So, resistant bacteria in animals were ruining the effect of a vital drug for humans. The Danish studies resulted in a ban by the European Union. First, avoparcin was banned in 1996, and during the next 10 years, all growth promoters were similarly banned. Nevertheless, the development of resistant bacteria didn't stop, which for hospitals proved to be a grave problem.
Despite the growing alarm around this strain of MRSA, the government does not routinely test for the superbug, either in our farms or in our meat. Denmark is Europe's largest pork producer and one of the main suppliers of pork, but the pig industry in Denmark is in the grip of a growing epidemic.
We're not only the world leading exporters of pigs, we also export MRSA.
An estimated 2/3 of Danish piggeries are contaminated with the superbug, and cases have tripled in the last 5 years.
It's an epidemic out of control in Denmark.
Unlike Britain, the Danish government has been testing for the superbug. According to official figures, as many as 12,000 people are infected. Recent tests in Denmark showed that 1 in 5 of the country's pork products contained the animal superbug. Meanwhile, in the UK, the Food Standards Agency say they have no plans to test our meat routinely, as they consider the health risk to be minimal.
The American health authorities estimated that 1 in every 20 patients became infected by pathogenic bacteria whilst in hospital. Resistant bacteria quickly spread in countries where antibiotics were administered without doctor consultation. And in countries where antibiotics were prescription drugs, patients pressured doctors to prescribe antibiotics even when it wasn't necessary. The World Health Organization estimated that in the treating of bronchial infections, up to 80% of antibiotic use was completely unnecessary.
More than 20,000 people a year are dying from these infections, and as many as 2 million get sick from them. What's become apparent is that these nightmare infections are being fueled by the overuse of antibiotics, creating bugs we can't kill.
Woher kommen diese neuartigen Erreger, diese hochgefährlichen Keime? Christoph Lübbert ist Arzt an der Uniklinik Leipzig und forscht zu dieser Frage. Vor 10 Jahren gab es solche Erreger in Deutschland nahezu nicht. Heute sind es tausende Fälle.
Die kommen zum Beispiel über Reisende zu uns. Und das kann man ja auch mit Zahlen ganz konkret untermauern. Wir haben selber eine Studie gemacht, nach der reine Touristen, die die Sehenswürdigkeiten Indiens angeguckt haben, zu über 70% mit multiresistenten Darmbakterien besiedelt zurückkommen.
Besonders viele dieser antibiotikaresistenten Bakterien grassieren in Indien. Gleichzeitig versorgt die indische Pharmaindustrie die ganze Welt mit Antibiotika. Forscher behaupten, es gebe da einen Zusammenhang. Pharmahersteller aus der ganzen Welt lassen in Hyderabad Medikamente produzieren. Hier kommen auch viele unserer Antibiotika her.
Hyderabad cluster has come to be recognized as
Hyderabad, die Hauptstadt der Massenproduktion von Medikamenten.
So effekthascherisch lockt dieser Hochglanzwerbespot.
Unser Motto: minimale Kontrolle, maximale Förderung.
With motto: minimum inspection, maximum facilitation.
Wozu minimale Kontrolle führen kann, sehen wir am Mussi. In dem Fluss landen Abwässer der Pharmafabriken, angeblich geklärt.
Dieser Schaum entsteht, weil hier alles zusammenkommt. Kommunale Abwässer und Abwasser aus der Pharmaindustrie. Und damit wird auch die ganze Umgebung verseucht. Und das Schlimme ist, es wird nicht besser, sondern immer dramatischer. Die Nachfrage nach Medikamenten steigt und steigt. Die Pharmafirmen produzieren immer mehr. Und je mehr produziert wird, desto mehr verseuchte Industrieabwässer kommen hier in diesen Fluss.
Denn Bakterien sind ausgesprochen anpassungsfähig. Um zu überleben, können sie Abwehrmechanismen entwickeln. Wenn sie in Kontakt mit Antibiotika kommen, überleben nur die besonders robusten Supererreger. Sie sind gegen viele Antibiotika resistent. Ihre Resistenzen können sie an andere Bakterien weitergeben. Und die Erreger teilen und vermehren sich ständig. Aus einem können innerhalb eines halben Tages mehr als 1 Milliarde werden. Über die Umwelt übertragen sie sich auf Menschen und Tiere und verbreiten sich immer weiter. Über das Wasser oder die Nahrung gelangen die resistenten Bakterien auf die Haut oder siedeln sich im Darm an. Bei gesunden Menschen ist das zumeist nicht gefährlich, aber die Keime werden auch weiter übertragen. Und wenn man krank wird oder sich verletzt, können sie gefährliche Entzündungen auslösen. Wenn Antibiotika nicht wirken, verbreiten sich die Bakterien rasant. Sie können zu einer lebensgefährlichen Blutvergiftung führen.
Today, old diseases are re-emerging with a vengeance. Tuberculosis, for instance, is now one of the world's biggest killers, with over 2 million people dying from it every year.
Don't think that this is a problem that would solve itself just by closing your eyes.